Watchers in the Fourth Dimension.
In the cause of science, I think it's our duty to capture that creature.
Does your Kelly ride a bicycle?
Bicycle?
Yes. They're all the rage in Trenton, New Jersey.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Do you have to have a license?
Hello and welcome back to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension. I'm Anthony.
I'm Julie.
And I'm Riley, and I will plead with my colleague for a swift, painless death for you.
This episode, we're heading back to 20th century Earth to deal with living stones, machine justice, and a false Celtic goddess as we discuss the Stones of Blood. But before we get into that, Riley's going to take a quick look at the mail.
I'm going to take a quick look at a mail, because last time I was a little over-exuberant and took too much mail. So please send us more mail. We have one comment from Adam Wright about our Season 15 retrospective. He says, "First, love the episode title. I won't dwell on season flaws. This is not my favorite Baker season, but it gave us Leela and K9. As a kids show, K9 had to happen in order to appeal to kids, just like Scooby-Doo or Jabberjaw." I would guess he meant Scrappy-Doo, maybe, because Scooby-Doo was already there to start.
Scrappy-Doo is the worst.
Sunmaker stays my favorite of the season. And that's the mail, Anthony. Back to you.
All right, thank you for that, Riley. And as a reminder, we do really love getting your feedback, thoughts, comments, and questions, and we do try to read out as many as possible on the show, even to the extent as reading out so much that we have nothing for the next episode. But please do get in touch. You can contact us through Facebook, Instagram, and X at Watchers4D, or you can email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. Additionally, we would absolutely love it if you subscribe to the podcast, if you're not doing so already, and if you dropped us a review or rating on your podcast platform of choice. Now, heading behind the scenes on the pirate planet, writer David Fisher had long had an interest in the mythology of cycloliths, which, in layman's terms, are stone circles. And he had unsuccessfully proposed a story based around Stonehenge for Doctor Who's very first season back in 1963. Since then, he went away, worked on several other TV shows, including Dixon of Dock Green, Mogul, and most notably, he wrote 48 episodes of Crown Court. In 1977, Fisher was among the new writers that script editor Anthony Reed approached for the show's 16th season. Reed was looking for a story idea with supernatural overtones, and so Fisher leapt at the chance to return to the Stone Circles theme. He was also asked to include strong female characters in his storyline.
Oh, yes!
And it was commissioned under the title The Nine Maidens at the end of 1977. Fisher's scripts would then briefly become known as The Stones of Time. There was briefly a period when they were working on the season when every single story became the something of time before they changed their minds on that and it became The Stones of Blood. The story would be placed third in the season to ensure that it would be broadcast around the time of Halloween. Fisher included several references to British mythology in his scripts. Vivien Fay and her earlier pseudonym, Lady Morgana Montcalm, reference Morgan Le Fay, King Arthur's sorceress half-sister. The word Cailleach is a Gaelic word meaning old woman and was associated with several figures in Celtic mythology. The Ogre were named to resemble or to recall ogres, and the name Dr. Thomas Borlase was a homage to two historians, Thomas Price and William Borlase. The Megara were named for the Megara, one of the Furies or Erinyes of Greco-Roman mythology, and they were goddesses who persecuted those guilty of terrible crimes. Assigned as director for the serial, we have Darrell Blake, who makes his first and sadly only contribution to Doctor Who, but he had some decent sci-fi credibility. He previously directed episodes of Doomwatch, Ace of Wands, and The Tomorrow People. Blake made a few changes to some of the ideas that Fisher had. The Ogre were originally envisioned as rocky-skinned humanoids who would look like megaliths only when they stood still. To save on costs, Blake had them appear as huge stones throughout the whole story. This saved some budget and allowed for the inclusion of the campers in Part 3, which would also serve an additional purpose. Instead of crushing people as Fisher had originally intended, the Ogre would now absorb their blood. The Megara were originally intended to be flying metal orbs, but Blake felt that that was too similar to the training remote that was used by Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, and so he re-envisioned them as floating lights. Joining the rest of Blake's behind-the-scenes team, we of course have Dudley Simpson as composer and John Nathan Turner as production unit manager. As designer, we have the only contribution to the show of John Stout, who is also known for work on Out of the Unknown, Top of the Pops, and of course, Z Cars.
Yay.
And lastly, as costumer, we have Rupert Jarvis making his second contribution to the show. He had previously worked on last season's Underworld, and we'll see him a couple more times in the future. Before filming started, John Leeson was of course contracted to continue to provide the voice of K9 for this story. And Mary Tam, who had actually only been contracted for the first 2 serials of the season, had her contract extended to cover the final 4. Up until this point, the production team had an idea that maybe Romana would regenerate several times during the quest for the key to time, but they dropped this idea when they realized how fantastic Mary Tam was. During filming, it was actually realized that the Stones of Blood would be the 100th Doctor Who serial. We've reached 100, guys.
Wow.
Yeah. And that its transmission would be very close to the show's 15th anniversary on November the 23rd. With part 1 underrunning, it was briefly agreed that an extra scene would be added in which Romana and K9 would celebrate the Doctor's 751st birthday, complete with a cake and a present. And the present was going to be a new scarf, which would be identical to the one that he was already wearing.
Boo.
The sequence was soon dropped, with Reed and producer Graham Williams deciding that it was far too self-congratulatory. In its place, Williams scripted the White Guardian's warning and the ensuing discussion, providing a recap of the story-long arc. Blake was disappointed with this decision, as he had already ordered a specially made birthday cake. Which I think is just amazing. The finished version of the serial was, as usual, broadcast on consecutive Saturdays between October the 28th and November the 18th, 1978. And before we go ahead and discuss the story, the short summary is with Julie this time around. Over to you, Julie.
Thanks, Anthony. Must I say, it's like David Fisher knew exactly what I wanted. A multi-woman cast with stone circles, creepy music, and a bullshit criminal trial. So what if moving killer stones don't make sense, or that we get introduced to characters who only get killed a minute later? It's amazing. Romana, though captured, gets released and immediately plans how to save the Doctor, and does so. The Doctor gets to be his best when trying to save himself during his trial, and K9 continues to be the best boy by sacrificing himself to save everyone else. And if only Amelia could have joined them in the TARDIS at the end, but remember, she does have her academic reputation to consider. Back to you, Anthony.
All right, well, I think we're going to have a great discussion about this one, so let's get started with part 1. And I realize we start with a fair amount of exposition, and I think it's actually quite well done.
Yes, and it's fair. It's well done, and it's important because, once again, we live in a streaming age, and we can find out what's going on by catching up easily. But back then, when an episode, if you missed it, it's gone. So they needed to tell everyone what the hell's going on.
Well, and they hadn't resolved it in the previous serial. We even stated they just run off, and they don't even change the crystal into what we expect it to be. So now we actually get to see it, and then them putting together and then getting that little montage. It was a really well done little piece.
And of course, Romana finally finds out that she wasn't sent by the president of the Time Lords, and the Doctor tells her about the Guardians. So that's a nice little bit of exposition for Romana.
And it gives us a moment which provides a very good bookend for the tone of this episode, where we have her showing the Doctor how the pieces of the key fit together, which is then repeated again later at the end.
Yes, because she's smarter than him. Very quickly, we cut to a cult in a stone circle. It's clearly Earth, and we are back to the Gothic. This is very much the aesthetic of the Hinchcliffe era. Dudley's music, I think, recalls his music during those Gothic stories. I think it's really well done, and over the course of the story sends up that era of Doctor Who really well.
It's funny you said that, because that also hits on something that I picked up on, and that is, I also felt this was a send-up. And I'm not saying this is in a negative way. Usually, if the show, like, let's say in the Sunmakers, all the tax jokes wore me out. This time, I feel like everyone is in on a joke, as in that they're all realizing how ridiculous this is and how silly it is, and they're not taking it seriously at all. But it doesn't come across as poor, and yet there's still moments where you feel invested. It's really a fine line that they are walking here, but they seem to pull it off.
Yeah, they definitely do. And I think it helped that at the time there had been a few kids' shows that were based around stone circles as well. So that was kind of en vogue. You'd had Children of the Stones, you'd had Sky. So taking that setting, recalling the Gothic horror, and then the show making fun of itself, it just works.
Yes, it really does.
There were a couple times when I think they even went as far as to go into the costuming to point out how things go, because the shoes that she wears at first.
Shoes.
Oh, the shoes. Yeah.
Oh, that was fantastic. I love watching things when they're wearing very impractical shoes, and it makes me cringe every time. If you're with a doctor, wear comfortable shoes.
And it seemed to be something that carried on that element, that plot point, till like 15 minutes into the first episode, which, by the way, was the first episode directed by a relative of Quentin Tarantino? I'm just asking.
Asking for a friend.
Yes.
As far as I know, Daryl Blake was not related to Quentin Tarantino, but you never know.
All right. Well, they might share similar tastes.
I loved all of it. I loved so much of it. And at first, the one outfit, I was like, oh man, we don't get to see her hair. But she pulled off that hat so well that I didn't care.
Was that real Burberry?
Ah, I have no idea.
I think it might have been.
I wouldn't know that, Anthony.
Sorry. Very, very quickly, we meet our latest dotty old lady.
I love her.
Professor Amelia Rumsford. And she's the best.
It seems to me that if you have a Doctor Who serial that deals with the occult in the English countryside, you need to have a dotty old lady. It seems to really help the serial.
Absolutely. And just from the moment that she shows up and she's like, it's been surveyed, you know, surveyed. And then she recognizes the Doctor as a fellow professional and then starts rambling about conferences where they might have met and papers, and immediately love her.
Yeah.
Absolutely love her.
It's so funny because when I first saw it, I was like, this could get pretty tedious. And then after another minute, I was like, nope, she's gold. It's beautiful.
She is absolute gold the whole way through.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we already touched upon it, but the music, so good.
And then we meet her friend, Vivien Fay.
And speaking of wearing the right thing for the occasion, Vivien Fay does not seem to be well dressed for doing some sort of topographical study. I mean, she's wearing a pink pantsuit out in like a soggy marsh. That just is asking for stains.
I mean, she's going to use her powers to...
Her witchy powers.
Yeah.
It's one of those situations because knowing enough of English mythology and things, you immediately know that she is going to be a villain. But also at the same time, you don't know how she is being the villain and how she's hidden it so well. And I thought that was brilliant.
And this also tries to do the double bluff because it tries to set up in this first episode Mr. Davies as the villain. Mm-hmm. He's the head of the Druids. He's involved in sacrifices. When the Doctor meets him, it's that kind of classic hero and villain staring each other down kind of dynamic. And then, spoiler, the story promptly kills him off in part 2.
Right. And not to bring up a sore subject, but that's what they should have done on the pirate planet. I'll move on.
But yes, I really enjoyed so many of these moving parts. The atmosphere was great. Obviously, filming around the stone circles, great. The house that they used for Mr. DeFreeze, excellent house.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
And I like the actor that plays Mr. Davies. I love the character because he seems to be the classic Doctor Who occult human villain condensed in a very short time span where he goes full believer, goes too far, and then suddenly realizes he's in over his head. And it's like doing the Doctor Who villain speed run for him.
It is. And once his robes come off, he looks like a banker. Which in itself is pretty funny, which is also pretty common with this. You kind of saw that in The Demons with the Master. When he wasn't wearing his robes, he wandered around dressed as a priest. Mm-hmm. I mean, they all look very like typical English when they're not wearing their occult robes. It's amazing. But he is being signposted as the villain. And as he's showing the Doctor around his house, he talks about the missing portraits, which are always being cleaned. The Lady Montcalm, Mrs. Trefusis, and Senora Camara. Mm-hmm. All three of them, I think, have kind of lesbianic vibes to them. They talk about, whoa, was there a Senor Camara? No, there wasn't.
Right.
You
okay.
know? One of them killed her husband very quickly. Okay. Seeing a vibe here.
I think it's more of a just woman by herself wanting to have all the power is really what it sounds like to me. But I love just getting that background and also the fact that he is sitting there pontificating to the doctor about his portraits. Like, why? But it's fine. It's wonderful. Another thing that I liked is the other little things that they threw in there, the crows.
Yep.
The fact that they followed through with the crows just made me very happy. So happy.
And DeVries even makes a point about it. He says the stone circle is dedicated to the Kaliach, and the ravens and the crows are her eyes. I love that whole interaction so much, and I also really love how during it, the Doctor goes out of his way to be offensive about Druidism.
Yes.
It's so funny.
It really is. And you thought that DeVries looked like a banker. He looks like a thin British Dr. Phil to me.
I mean, I don't trust either, so...
That's why I find it very humorous when he is freaking out and when he is murdered by 2 roaming blocks of stone.
Yeah. Anyway, the Doctor gets coshed. Guess he's going to get sacrificed. And Romana is lured away from the stone circle by what sounds like the Doctor's voice towards some cliffs, which she promptly trips off of.
Right. But let's not forget, we have, I thought, which was a really good costume, that crow costume.
Oh, yeah, that the Kaliach wears.
It looks great. I wish it was there more, because then we just go fully on with Vivien being in her kind of...
Painted silver?
Painted evening wear look. I don't know what you want to call it.
We'll come back to that, because I have some thoughts on that. But... do we think that DeVries and co. knew that it was Vivien in the crow costume, or do you just think she kind of rocked up in costume?
She rocked up.
They had no idea who it was?
Absolutely.
Love that.
After doing a couple nights at Carnival in Brazil, she showed up.
You know, she really is the one who started Cirque du Soleil.
That would be amazing. And we're into part 2, and the cliffhanger is not so much resolved, but the recap is very, very quick. Right. We immediately cut to Romana kind of hanging on by her fingertips.
So I like almost all of this, but every once in a while, there's some interesting choices, like the, oh, hey, all of a sudden it's the middle of the night.
Yeah.
It was very, very sudden. But I did find it interesting that they're all about this ritual and using blood, but they're not for sacrifice.
Right.
Well, you know, sacrificing animals versus sacrificing people. And I guess someone like potentially cutting themselves is very different from actually killing someone. So I kind of get it. But yeah, I mean, good point, Julie.
Also, I have to point out that I think this is where I was beginning to get the vibe that they weren't taking themselves seriously this episode and everyone involved with it. And like I said, that's not a bad thing. I enjoyed this. And the part was how the Doctor is saved by an elderly woman stumbling across a colt. A colt literally gets scared away by an elderly woman.
It's even better because the dialogue in the lead up to that, the Doctor comes round and he's just immediately flippant. He says, I hope that knife's been properly sterilized. DeVries calls him a blasphemer. And then as Rumsford is coming in, does your Kaliach ride a bicycle? Blasphemer! It's very Monty Python.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
And then when she gets into the stone circle, her reaction to this is, you know, he's tied up on this fucking slab. And she's like, good grief, man, what are you doing? You'll catch your death of cold. I'm like, oh, yeah.
But you mentioned like the actual lines, because the very true lines themselves are so good. You'll die with blasphemy on your lips. Excellent. I often get tied up in my job.
Yeah.
He does.
I love all of the lines. They're so good.
Yeah, and the dialogue just really shines in this. I mean, when they're trying to figure out finding Romana, and she says, if we had a dog, and the Doctor's reaction is, have I got a dog? I mean, the affection there for K9 shines through. It's lovely.
Yeah.
And then K9 shows up, and I'm just going to keep quoting because I think the dialogue is another thing that is solid gold. You've always wanted to be a bloodhound. Negative. Yes, you have. Negative. The humor is just so strong.
Oh, and it carries out through every episode. It's not like there's one episode that they just suddenly like lay on all the jokes. It's consistent.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. We get to Romana, And she has the actual true response that one should have. She thought the doctor knocked her down. And so she says, no, absolutely not. I don't trust you. That was actually fun. And it got resolved quickly and in a actual plausible way.
Right. Because also she's only been around with him for how many adventures now? 3, 2?
This is her third.
There you go. The trust has not been built up yet.
But she has heard of him because, of course, she's a Time Lord and he's a legendary Time Lord.
I mean, she was the one who pointed out that the fact that his favorite planet is Earth.
Yeah.
Can we talk about when the professor meets K9?
Sure.
Because I nearly died at the doctor's comment, which is when he says that they're all the rage in Trenton, New Jersey.
Oh, right.
It's so good.
I cannot. I simply cannot.
And she just goes with it.
She absolutely does, and it's magnificent.
And see, what's lovely about that, and this is where that connection between these characters really hits off, is that he's obviously pushing the limits of believability that he's not a being from outer space. And yet, how she comes to that conclusion herself and the way she asks the doctor if he is from outer space, which I believe is either later on this episode or the very next one, you can hear when she asks him that she's pretty certain herself that he is, and that she already kind of figured that out.
Yeah.
And so it's really great to show that both of them were playing each other along a little bit.
Absolutely. And we kind of have a little bit of a parting of the ways here. The Doctor and K9 go off to see Mr. Davies again, which is an interesting call. You know, after you've just been coshed and nearly sacrificed, let me go see this geezer again. All right. And Romana is invited back to the cottage by Amelia and Vivien. And Vivien invites her to ride her bicycle and says it will be a new experience for her. I'm reading a lot of innuendo into this. I'm sorry. There is something very gay about Vivien, and that's fine.
No, I can see that.
I can see that. One thing I love, though, I do want to go to the Doctor and K9 going to Mr. Davies because 2 things about it. One, I was not expecting him to already be dead. We're not even halfway through the 2nd episode, and he's dead. Okay.
I have something I need to mention about that, Julie, but carry on and I'll come back to it.
The Doctor covering K9's eyes so that he doesn't see Mr. Davies is so good. It's so wonderful. Okay.
So there's a cutscene in this. It was restored on the VHS version and it's there as an extra on the DVD. But when Davies and Martha are freaking out, the raven is gone, the pulsating stone is moving past the window. In the version you saw, all they're doing is freaking out and there's, I'm not going to leave you. There's a cutscene where she tries to persuade him to run. And she says something like, we could be in Plymouth in an hour. And his response is, Plymouth? Good grief, woman.
Oh, wow.
Which I think is just amazing, and I'm so sad that it's not in the actual televised version.
Which is crazy because it was that scene in particular, their death scene, where it was there that I completely was convinced, yes, they are having fun, they're making fun, they're not taking this seriously.
They're
this
taking the piss.
Like,
yes.
Yeah, they are taking the piss, this is for certain, because the over-the-top acting in that was hilarious.
Yeah, and it was more over the top with that Plymouth piece.
Yes, I'm sure.
So very sad that's not in there because I think it's hilarious.
I also love the fact that K9 goes off to fight a big giant rock.
Yes. Yes.
Just...
I want to touch on the dead bodies because the Doctor says their skulls are smashed to a pulp. And we don't see them die, and we don't see a close-up of them. And I actually think that's really good direction. It leaves it to the imagination, and they're not trying to make a convincing, gory shot that's going out at 5:30 p.m. on a Saturday on primetime TV. I think that's really clever and a really, really good decision. And obviously now Davies is not the main villain.
Right, which is lovely.
And now we get to just focus in on the women, and it's phenomenal. I was excited just seeing how many women were in this that weren't Romana, and then the fact that they're actually very good made me even happier.
Yes.
Take that, Robert Holmes.
I'm going to say Professor Rumsford might be my favorite batty old lady that we've had so far. When she's talking about the position she didn't get, and she calls the guy that did an old fool, she's, more of her. Please.
It's so good. Okay, I want to get to the women doing their thing, eating sausage sandwiches, because why not? And the fact that Romana is able to just not quite immediately, but almost immediately be like, did you all notice that everything's owned by women? And I just find that amazing to have it noted that things were all owned by women in a serial that is almost predominantly all women.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's so good.
It's very self-aware.
Yes.
It's brilliant.
Yes.
Absolutely brilliant.
Mm-hmm. I guess we need to talk about the saddest, lowest point of the entire serial, which is usually a joyride, but...
Poor K9?
My God. The line of, I did my best, master, but it was so strong. Good God. Just, rip my heart out with a fork, why don't you?
I think I told you I now make my notes for these digitally, which, dear listener, that's something Don led with me to do for years, and I finally started doing it. I put a little crying emoji next to that in my notes.
Good Lord. It was crazy, and obviously we know that they wouldn't necessarily kill off, they better not kill off K9 in a manner similar to that, but still, it was rough.
Yeah, but this is what I really like about this story is they use these things to get characters from one place to another. So Romana needs to bring Rumsford to meet the Doctor. So they have Romana come meet the Doctor, but then they need Rumsford alone with the Doctor. So they have Romana take K9 to the TARDIS where his circuits can be regenerated. So they're almost using these to move the chess pieces around in the context of the story. Again, it's very, very clever.
Mm-hmm.
It's a masterpiece. I'm sorry, guys. This is a masterpiece. Okay, I'll say it now. We get to, yes, the separation, right? And now we have, I call her Amelia. I like that name, so I stuck with it. Is with the Doctor, and they find a priest hole. And that is awesome. I love it so much.
We haven't seen a priest hole since the Pyramids of Mars. That's another Gothic era mainstay.
And we get to the portraits.
Yes.
And we get our other reveal.
That the Kaliak is Vivien, and Vivien is all the portraits.
Yep.
And Romana disappears.
Yes.
Yeah, so when she leaves the TARDIS, there are two crows or ravens sitting on top of it, and of course Romana runs into Vivien just outside of the stone circle. And of course, Vivien's wearing her Kaliak costume without the headpiece. And she basically drags Romana into that stone circle and then points a wand at her and she disappears. And that's our cliffhanger. Before that, we also saw the Kaliak taking the blood from De Vries and Martha and pouring it on the stones and seeing how they then start pulsing and you get that heartbeat sound. It's quite chilling, but you hear her speak. And I think at that point, it's very clear that it's Vivien in the costume.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't catch that, to be honest with you.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I figured it was her based off once the portrait reveal was done, but I don't know if that scene of the blood pouring happened before or after that.
It happened before.
Ah.
Well, kind of in parallel, but very slightly before. All right, part 3.
Part 3.
And, oh my gosh, at first, Amelia thinking that Vivien is just related to the ladies in the portraits, and it's the Doctor who's putting the pieces together. The portraits are her, and oh, by the way, she's the Kaliak. I have a question on this scene. So this priest hole, this is meant to be a hidden area of the house. And the Doctor and Amelia have to go down a spiral stone staircase to get there. How does the Ogre get in there? Or is this a shut up, Anthony, stop asking awkward questions?
That one right there. That doesn't bother me, right? Because I don't know how they pulled it off, but I really like the Ogre as a monster.
Oh, yeah. They're bonkers, but they're brilliant.
What's really nice about it is it doesn't look like a silly man dressed up in a suit.
True.
It's not a horny shrimp. It's just stone, but with it glowing and gold, and it sucks people dry. Oh, it's somehow very well done, and bravo to the props and director. It's so good.
The creature design is really kind of a perfect microcosm of the serial as a whole to me. And that is that on its face and looking at it from a distance, you have these giant glowing stones that are chasing across an English countryside. It's like a damn Monty Python skit. Like the keep left signs that turn alive and try to chase people around. It feels like that. But then in this part 3, we have those Ogre going hunting with those two campers. And that was getting downright brutal. How they shot that gave you a taste of it. They could have gone and extended that scene a bit further, and it could have been up there with some rather disturbing horror movie elements, like really tragic. And so that is why I'm saying is that the creature design is a microcosm of the serial. It's that you look at it and it seems ridiculous and silly and like it's not taking itself seriously, but good Lord, it can be really effective.
I know we're skipping a little ahead in the episode, but brutal is the word I used in my notes to describe that scene.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know them. We get all of about 30 seconds of them. No one in our cast even knows they exist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they're just killed.
Yeah.
It's not that they're even significant. It's just purely there so that we can see what the ogre do.
Maybe this is a writing technique of keeping the balance. We have a lot of jokes. We have a lot of silliness. And, the Davies death was rather campy and silly. But amongst all that, we have the heart-wrenching canine scene in part 2. We have the horrific, brutal murder of 2 campers in part 3. I believe those 2 scenes are there to even us back up so we can take the jokes again. Because if you just get hammered by jokes over and over and over again, you're just going to turn off.
I agree. I think it balances it very well.
I wanted to touch upon one of my favorite Dutters moments.
Ooh, yes,
I think
please.
I know what it is.
The doctor is trying to figure out how we can destroy one of these ogres, so he has them chase them to the waterfall, whatever you want to call it, area. And he takes off his jacket, plays Matador,
Yep.
and Dutters does the music, but in such a way that it's not just that music. He plays that music and then has it go directly into the musical scene that he has been putting through in this whole serial. It is so well done.
Yes.
Yeah, and I also want to give a shout out in that scene to Liz Parker, who does special sounds, because in that scene, she made it sound like the ogre screamed as it fell off the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was really cool. I also want to talk a little about the lead up to that scene, because it is more Amelia just being wonderfully bonkers. And her and the Doctor are an amazing pairing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
When she says a silicon-based life form is unknown, it's impossible, the Doctor's response of, oh, maybe it doesn't realize that. And then she decides it is their responsibility for science to capture it.
And then it's asked, how are we going to capture it? And she just pulls out her,
truncheon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a pocket knife or something?
No, it's a truncheon.
Truncheon.
It's a policeman's truncheon.
Oh my. Oh.
It was established in part 2. She got it for when she went to New York in case she got mugged.
Oh,
and instead she got arrested for carrying an offensive weapon. Brilliant. I mean, as a character, she is so well fleshed out, not only through her own dialogue, but through all the little asides about her and this backstory that we hear from Vivien. Brilliant. I would love to have her join Barusa in the TARDIS.
Oh, wow.
Her and Barusa, oh man, just 2 old folks just going at it. Oh, it'd be so good.
Yeah. And when we did the Invasion of Time, we said Barusa would be brilliant just hanging out there, being kind of bitchy. Imagine the 2 of them doing that.
I would imagine them doing that as if there were 2 parents as the Doctor and the companion come back and scolding them for coming home late. That's what I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So, Vivien, it's almost alluded to that she's kind of going a little bit crazy for living for so long. 4,000 years stuck in this one place and doing all this. It seems somewhat to allude to the previous story where the one lady was trying to figure out how to live forever.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And how poorly that really ends up being for that person. I just thought that was interesting that it kind of ties those 2 little stories together.
Yeah, there are some similarities, and this is now the second story in a row where the main villain has been a woman, to your point, Julie. First Queen Xanxia, and now Vivien, also known as Cesare of Diplos. I was thinking about that watching it too and thought that was really interesting, because we went from a time when we barely had any to having the Doctor's main adversary in 2 stories running be women.
And it's interesting too because it was not the same writer either.
Right. So I wonder if that was something that Graham Williams and Anthony Reid kind of influenced.
I knew they did for this story.
Yeah.
But I don't know about the other one. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Now she is in full villain mode. She is absolutely chewing up the scenery in such a camp way, and I am here for it.
So good. Why is this so good?
Yeah. It's one of those things, I think the writer, the behind-the-scenes team, the cast that Darryl Blake put in place, it all just works together in a really magical way.
I also think that maybe just everyone was having a great time, that everyone was kind of given the direction of don't take this seriously, and everyone just had fun. And just that positivity comes through.
I think there was also a certain level of improv in this as well. Some of the lines, I really imagine just coming from the minds of Tom Baker and Mary Tamanko. There's that whole piece when the Doctor is trying to explain hyperspace to Amelia, and she responds with, "Oh, I see." And the Doctor responds with, "Good, perhaps you'll explain it to me when I have a few minutes to spare." I can imagine that being something that Tom Baker would have just said, and it might not have even been scripted.
Yeah.
But I think it works.
Okay, so we're building a machine to find out where Romana is in hyperspace.
Yes.
And K9, again, it's not quite as heart-wrenching, but the fact that first off, he has to be the one who's like, hey, this is how you build it. And then second off, like, he's going to have to hold off these ogre while all this is going on when he isn't fully restored. It hurts.
Yeah. And he's already taken a beating from them once, so he's like having to face up to his bully again.
Right.
Before we get there, to that point, I know Lost Story was the one written by Douglas Adams, but there is something kind of Douglas Adams about some of the dialogue here. There's that whole piece when the Doctor and Amelia are talking, and the Doctor says to her, "You know what they say about hyperspace?" And she says no, and he says, "Well, they say it's a theoretical absurdity, and that's something I've always wanted to be lost in." That, to me, came across as pure Douglas Adams.
Yeah.
Yes.
I also like POW as a technical expression.
Yes. As I said, the dialogue just sparkles in this. It really does. All right, so once we get to hyperspace, I feel like this is where we kind of flip from the Hinchcliffe era pastiche to something, the humor's still there, but it feels a lot more Graham Williams-y. You know, it's bright space corridors. The setting just feels like it's more era appropriate, I guess.
I have a question for Riley.
Oh, okay.
So I know that in the Rebos operation, you got upset when it went from a heist to a non-heist. But in this one, again, we shift focus a lot. We go from the cultish and that feel to this. Are you as upset about it in this one?
That's a great question, and it was something I was going to bring up. I'm not upset about it this time. I think the humor carries it over so much, and I feel like they ended up with a courtroom drama to finish up this serial because they painted themselves into a corner. But when I see that they're just having fun, they're not taking themselves seriously, if the quality is there, it's forgivable to me. It's not like they were trying to really pull something off. I honestly feel like, as it was written, they were going along, having a great time, and they're like, I don't know how to end this. And they thought it'd be absolutely absurd and hilarious. Let's turn it into a courtroom drama.
That's from the guy who wrote 48 episodes of Crown Court as well.
Oh, well, there you go. So, yeah, it doesn't bug me. It doesn't. But in fact, I thought that the courtroom scene or trial is where, to me, the humor just blasts off into the stratosphere.
Oh, absolutely. But before we get too far into that, I want to talk about the Doctor and Romana roaming the prison ship, because in Romana's cell, there's an android that looks very much like one of the ones from the android invasion. In one of the other cells, there is a dead Wirren.
Yes, yeah.
Wouldn't it have been magnificent if there was, like, I don't know, a desiccated Zygon or something in another one? That,
something. Yeah,
something else that was just kind of big and from the past and ridiculous that didn't quite fit and you wouldn't expect to see in this story. I really enjoy those kind of references.
Nah, the budget might not have been very happy with that.
Yeah. So they get to this sealed compartment as they're searching the ship, and the Doctor just opens it because why not? And we find out about the Megara.
They're so funny.
Oh my God.
They're so funny.
They're kind of bitchy.
It's good cop, bad cop, basically, but they bicker amongst themselves.
They do.
It's so wonderful.
The concept is they're these floating lights, they're justice machines whose job is to be the judge, jury, and executioner. And the penalty for removing the seal on their compartment is death, which is a bit melodramatic and just... This whole part, they're already starting to work on judging the Doctor, and while they're doing that, he just wanders off with Romana. It's just...
I have to say, the way that they're visualized is so much better than the transparent, crinkly paper that we got.
The Vardens.
The Vardens.
Yes.
And I actually think the floating lights was a much better decision than the metal orb that they originally wanted to go with as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yes.
And it doesn't look terrible.
No.
So while the Doctor is kind of wandering around the ship trying to avoid the Megara, Vivien makes a brief trip back to Earth, courtesy of Amelia turning the machine back on to try and get the Doctor and Romana back. Poor K9, he's so low on juice, he can't even stun her. She destroys the Doctor's machine and then heads back into hyperspace, taking the Ogre with her. And we get that cliffhanger of her saying, "You're trapped in hyperspace forever," and a maniacal laugh. We cut to the exterior of the ship. That's the cliffhanger. We're into part 4.
Yes. And first, I would like to point out, I think the set for the spaceship looks great.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes.
It really looks good. I miss them being on large spaceships on the show.
Oh, and I want to talk about what it looks like outside the windows.
Mm-hmm.
Because the lighting that they used, and it just looks very weird outside of the windows of that ship. I think that's really brilliant.
And it jives with the way the Doctor talked about hyperspace, it being this parallel dimension and one of the ways to get around the theory of relativity. I think that, to your point, Julie, that very weird look suits that really well. Can I say something about Vivien?
Yeah.
I did not find regular Vivien attractive, but Silver Vivien... she's quite hot. What's wrong with me, guys? What's wrong with me?
That's a great question, Anthony, and I don't know that I can answer you.
Oh, boy. Well, she was hilarious. I enjoyed her part of the trial as just sitting there being amused as the Doctor is just flinging any sort of logical trick or argument he can find to try to get out of the predicament that he's in. And she just is sitting there enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the big trial episode, basically.
Yes.
And initially, the Doctor is judged. He is sentenced to death, and his counsel recommends that he submits to execution. He demands an appeal. And while he wasn't allowed to be his own defense in the main trial, he is allowed to handle his own appeal. And he immediately pulls out a barrister's wig.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. I'm here for it. And the 14th Doctor does the same thing when putting the Meep on trial in the Star Beast.
Right. Yes, good call. And I will point out once again, because I will do it every single time, Bugs Bunny. That is a Bugs Bunny move.
Yes.
Point out a barrister's wig. Yes.
I have a theory that Russell T Davies loves this story, and I will come back to that in a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a quick thing where Romana goes on the stand very briefly, and then she starts leaving. And we have Vivien who's like, "How dare you? She can't leave." And they're like, "Well, what are we supposed to do? Stop her? She doesn't belong here," which I find fascinating. So then we get the two parallel lines, the trial, and then Amelia and Romana being badasses.
Yes.
Anyway.
So let's talk about the trial first.
Mm-hmm.
And Vivien, during all of this, to your point, Riley, she is constantly chewing the scenery here.
Yes.
When the Megara refused to put her under the truth beam, her laugh is so over the top, and I love it.
And let's not forget that Romana, she was under the truth beam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it's already set up there to show the audience.
Right. And she ultimately volunteers to submit to it. And you're kind of like, what is she up to? But she very cleverly knows they don't need to know her name. That's not relevant to any of this. So they're just going to ask her, were you there? No, I wasn't. All right, you're done.
And so that's the thing that's so lovely about this is that you can see as both of them are manipulating and understanding the Megara as that they are thinking at things only through a limited set of programming because they're machines. They're not being able to imagine anything outside of it. They're just kind of running through an algorithm or a flow chart, so to speak, for decision making. And so that just makes it applied to law, makes this so funny.
They won't even let the Doctor ask her name because it's not relevant. And then, even better, the one of them that is representing him tells him that he will plead to the other one for a swift, painless execution. Like, oh, this is your counsel? Okay, all right. Remind me never to hire you as my lawyer.
And I loved sometimes when they bickered amongst themselves, it was in their computer language. And so you just hear the...
And you can kind of hear moments where it seems to get more like animated and angry.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It reminded me of how when Disney characters Chip and Dale the Chipmunks, when they would get into an argument,
yes,
it would sound like that.
Again, it's Liz Parker who did the special sounds, doing a really good job here.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
all the ladies, just saying.
Yeah, and on that point, Julie, Liz Parker is the only woman ever credited with providing special sounds on Doctor Who.
Well, she is fantastic.
All the ladies.
All the ladies.
Not necessarily all the single ladies, but all the ladies.
All the ladies. Okay, so...
With Amelia and Romana, and this is where I think RTD loves this story, the scene of them trying to figure out where Vivien or Cessair of Diplos is from reminded me of the Ninth Doctor with the Slitheen. The whole, what do we know about them? Okay, narrows it down. We know this. Okay, narrows it down. To me, that is very parallel to this.
Okay.
And so now we have the second thing that I think RTD has referenced from this story. I think he loves this story. That's my theory.
I could believe it.
I mean, everyone should love this story. It's phenomenal. But I love that they figure the food thing was interesting. Citrus foods, avocados, that kind of thing. And figuring all that kind of stuff out. I thought Romana was being very clever in figuring out how to come in and save the day.
Yes. And then she didn't need to because the Doctor, in the meantime, figures everything she figures out through Megara.
Don't care. She still figured it out. What Vivien, I call her Vivien because Cessair, whatever that other name is harder. Her punishment is awful.
Yeah.
I do want to say, though, her punishment is effectively eternal imprisonment, and she's going to get imprisoned as a stone. Presumably until the Earth eventually falls into the sun, as we found out in the events of the Ark back in season 3. However, the punishment for everything she's done is eternal imprisonment, and then the Doctor's punishment for simply breaking the seal is death?
It's fine. Well, because what the Doctor did was against the Megara, and then everything Vivien's done has not been against the Megara. I wouldn't put it past him to be selfish like that.
It's almost like in certain sports, you don't touch the referee or umpire.
Yeah.
Right? That's an immediate sending off in some sports. Okay, I get it.
As we've already moved to the ending, I wanted to bring up the part where it was a little confusing when the Doctor, as he's about to be executed, they don't really explain as to how when he touched Vivien, when he was about to be hit by the Megara, that by doing that, it kind of spread the death energy between the two of them. So both of them survived. I was a little unclear on when that happened.
Yeah, it's not well explained, but I think you're nitpicking.
All right. Yeah, I said, it doesn't bother me. It was a hell of a ride. I was just a bit confused, but immediately was just enthralled by the disturbingness of her being turned into a stone.
Yeah. The way to do this is they have to have her memory read. And the only way to do that is the Doctor has to persuade them, and that's to make sure that she's okay. And that's when they identify her as Cessair of Diplos, who took the Great Seal, which has all these mystical properties that's been allowing her to change her form and do whatever. And, of course, removed a protected species from the planet Ogros.
Oh, and we didn't get to discuss a really cool effect they did of one of the Ogre being disintegrated. Obviously, it's just a low cut of their, I guess, for lack of a better term, feet, and somebody off screen just dumping a bunch of like sand or rubble. I think that was it. It looked great. It looked real good.
So good.
All right, well, let's talk about the end. The Doctor sends the Megara off to Diplos, and Amelia's going to have to resurvey the circle and write a paper.
I really want to know how she explains it away, because it's been surveyed by multiple different people, and then now it's like, hey, all of a sudden, here's a new stone.
Well, it was said earlier that even then there were inconsistencies in the number of stones between surveys.
Okay.
So this will, in all likelihood, be the final, because I think the surviving Ogre have been taken back to Ogros, hopefully, and now she's there as a stone. So this should mean that the stones are consistent. So this should be the final survey.
That's fair. Okay.
But I do love I have my academic reputation to think about.
So we get to the bookend.
Yes. the segment of the key was Vivien's necklace.
Right, which there was no hinting at that at all.
I think the only thing we really got was there were times when the tracer pointed towards the circle and times when it didn't. So it was clearly being brought in and out. So was it one of the ogre? Was it something that someone was carrying? And I think the necklace, was that meant to be the Great Seal of Diplos that was referenced?
Oh, huh.
I think it was.
Well, you would think the Megara would want that as evidence or something, or to return it.
Well, maybe the doctor sent them off before they could say anything.
Right,
So
that's right.
I think it was the Great Seal.
Okay.
It's maybe not as explicit as it could be, but the story works so well without it.
And we have the look from the doctor not being able to put the pieces in place because he is an idiot.
Oh, it's brilliant. And what I love is, while we've seen so much of Tom's ego, this hasn't been an ego trip for him. There's been a lot of humor, but he's kind of been at the receiving end of it at times, and he hasn't seemed too upset about it.
Yeah.
So it's all good. It's all gravy, baby.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings us to the end. So very quickly before we rate it, let's do some metrics. I didn't count any I'll explain laters.
Mm-hmm.
There were no jelly babies this story.
No.
After all of the jelly babies last time round. And now we come to the camp count.
Oh, Lord.
I think we're going to rack up some points here, guys, because I think we had Vivien and her scenery chewing. We had the Megara being bitchy as fuck.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to call out?
Devries.
Devries. Yeah, his death scene.
Yeah.
Or just him in general, like his acting during the rituals were pretty out there.
I think each of those are deserving of multiple points.
Yeah.
Some of them more points than others. I'm going to advocate for we give this 8 camp count points.
Okay. I'm fine with that.
I could be convinced with 8. Yep.
2 for Devries' death, and then 3 for the bitchy Megara, and 3 for Vivien chewing up the scenery.
Okay.
All right.
That is the most camp count points we have had on a story since... Holy shit.
Ever?
No, since The Underwater Menace.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and rate this. And Julie, you have the opportunity to go first this time.
If it was not clear, I love this story. I adore everything about this story. It is fun. The dialogue is phenomenal. There's no big, giant, gaping plot holes. There are no weird villains that are poorly realized. The direction is good. Dutters is on his A game. And it is a woman-centric story, and it works very, very well. I'm going to do it, guys.
Yeah, you are.
Oh, boy.
I'm going to give this 10 sparkling little lights out of 10.
All right, Riley.
This serial feels like when you forget to prepare for a presentation and you wing it and you completely pull it off. There's a level of not taking itself seriously here, which helps elevate an absolutely humorous serial. They don't dawdle on the fake big bad with Avengers very long. They have great pacing. Amelia and Vivien were excellent characters, as well as the Megara. K9, probably his strongest episode to date. The chemistry between the Doctor and Romana is, I believe, building. The Fourth Doctor is playful and happy this go-around. This is a fun, not serious serial, which is an absolute joy. I give it 8.5 charges of impersonating a Celtic goddess out of 10.
Wow. I was half expecting you to do it as well, Riley, to do the thing.
Oh, no.
Not quite.
Not there. No.
Okay. Well, I really love this story too. I think the script and specifically the dialogue, I've used the phrase sparkles a lot, but I think it really does. I think the dialogue is witty, it's funny, and yet it doesn't feel forced. The cast seem to be having a really great time. It's well directed. We talked about the Ogre and how theoretically they could have looked absolutely awful. They could have. And yet somehow they kind of work, even though they're basically big stone monoliths that are actually made out of polystyrene, but they work. The plot itself is fun. Davies, I really love the kind of fake out with him. And last but not least, I love the fact that this is a little bit of a pastiche of what we've seen in the Hinchcliffe era and the Gothic era of the show. It feels appropriate and it really, really works for me. So I'm going to give this one, and I can't quite bring myself to go for the 10, but I will give this 9.5 sexy silver women out of 10. Which gives us a story average of 9.33, which is the highest we've had since the Robots of Death.
Wow.
So really, really strong outing this time. So that brings us to the end of the episode. We will be back next time around when we will be heading into a Prisoner of Zenda send-up as we go into the Androids of Tara. But in the meantime, as always, thank you so very much for listening, and have a good one. You have been listening to Watchers in the Fourth Dimension with Riley Schreck, Julie Philippek, and myself, Anthony Williams. This episode, All the Ladies, was recorded on Wednesday, the 8th of May, 2024. If this is your first time listening into the show, all of our previous episodes are available wherever you like to get your podcasts. You can also interact with us on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Watchers4D, and you can also email us at watchers4d@gmail.com. If you're enjoying the show, please do subscribe and consider leaving us a review or rating on your favorite podcasting app. All of those things really do help the show. And always remember, screwing with the judges may have a bigger penalty than theft, kidnapping, and murder all combined. So don't do it.